and welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hello, Tom. This is the second time we meet today. It's lovely to see you again.
Yes, I know. It's like we live in this virtual world. It's crazy. And we are delighted to have with us Amarbeer Singh Gill. Singh, welcome to our podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to like the next 45 minutes.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah, so people may find you on Twitter. You're one of those people who, a bit like me, who doesn't read your real name and your handle. So you're Inspired Learn.
That's correct. Yeah,
which is a great handle for anyone to on Twitter. Inspired Learn, fantastic, which is really great. And of course, we work together on the In Action series, and Emma is also an author in the In Action series. So we're kind of part of that family. So quite a lot of what we want to talk to you about is about your work on the book. So come on, Emma, we can do this for the YouTube.
I don't know.
You should have one as well. We're holding up the book. Dunlosky Strengthening the Student's Toolbox in Action. Oh, look, he's disappeared.
Here you go.
Here we go, like 3, 2, 1, simultaneous. That's more like it. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's so exciting because, you had the idea to, essentially pitch that book. I mean, there are some other books in the series where I asked people, I was working through some papers and you said, hey, Tom, this would make a great In Action book. Can I write that? And I was going, yeah, what a great idea. So just tell people a bit about that. What was it that drew you to want to pitch to write that book, and you did it so well?
So I used to mentor trainee and NQT teachers when I was in school, and one of my trainees was given the Rosensheen In Action book, and I asked their their school training provider if they had any spares, because it looked like a really interesting book. So they kindly gave me one of the spare copies they had going, and it just sounded like a great way to bridge this gap between research and classroom practice. I found it like a really accessible book. I thought it obviously took Rosensheen's ideas and gave them practical applications, put it into teacher talk, so to speak. And so I got into other bits of the series from there. So I read, I think Ollie Lovell's was next, and then Zoe Mark Enson's book was after that. As I was like, oh, this fits really nicely with this Dunlosky paper, which I came across. It was one of the first papers I got when I was on my master's, and I thought, the two just marry up perfectly. So yeah, took a shot, emailed Alex at JohnCatt, who I'd never met before, and said, oh, I'm me. What are your thoughts about me getting involved in this project? And it went from there. I'd been doing some writing for some of the EEF research schools at that point as well. So that helped sort of lay some foundations and refine my thinking about what sort of language do I want to use and put it into. So that's where it all sort of came from. I was talking to someone else a little while ago. 6-7 months ago, I was just some teacher from Gravesend. And I still am some teacher from Gravesend in North Kent. But now it's it's quite weird. I feel it's still surreal, having a book to my name.
Well, it's great. I mean, I have to say, no one is just some teacher from Gravesend. You're like a teacher from Gravesend. And it was cool because John Dunlosky, you contacted him, didn't you? And so that was interesting. So what was his response to someone writing a book about his paper?
I'm really enthusiastic. We came up with a pitch and a rough outline of the book. I sent it across to him. He gave his thoughts on it and was fully supportive. Ended up writing the foreword for it as well. And so he sent me an email a little while ago saying he'd got his copy of it. And was proudly placed on his bookshelf, which I think is a pretty big compliment. So yeah, I'm definitely happy with that. But yeah, he was a massive supporter of it from early days.
No, it's great. So you're a big fan. You're a big fan of Dunlosky as well, aren't you, Emma?
Well, do you know what? Yes, but when this only arrived yesterday, my copy did. And I sat down and I genuinely thought I was going to have to spend hours and hours digesting it. You have explained this so beautifully, Singh. It's so easy to read, so straightforward. And it's not necessarily really straightforward content, but you have made it so accessible. And so that I kind of whizzed through it and thought, this is absolutely brilliant. So I really, really, really loved it. And the bit that jumped out for me is not necessarily Dunlosky's bit. It's the quote that you top and tail the book with, the one about the tree and the roots and the branches. I'd just really like to hear you explain why that particular quote, even though it's not Dunlosky's, it kind of tops and tails the book, really.
So I it's a great question, actually. Like I've never had anyone ask that question before. I've never had to think as deeply as I think I probably am now. I wanted to, like, it was important for me to acknowledge like my roots and like where I come from, like the sort of life I'm like lucky enough to live right now. And so this was like part of my way of acknowledging like my background, my culture, my religion, but also like it wasn't just like a superfluous thing. The point I was trying to make was quite often in teaching and education, we get sold the like fruits of the tree as if they're independent from the tree. Like we can enjoy the fruits without having to like nurture and like raise this tree and do all this stuff, like heavy lifting. And like it's captivating for reasons like, you know, teachers, schools are time and resource poor, but actually that process of growing the tree is really important in being able to enjoy those fruits. So I wanted people to have that in mind as they were going through the book and like get to the end and then still say like, these ideas are really good, but these are potentially the fruits. Make sure we're appreciating the tree where it's come from as well.
So let's just, for people who don't know it, I'm just going to read it out. And the English version is, when the tree is cut off at its roots, the branches wither and die. But how do you say what language is it in that you've written it in here?
So yeah, it's originally from Gurmukhi, which is like the written script of Punjabi. Is original format is Bed Manahu Katiye Dis Dal Sukande, which translates roughly as, when the tree is cut off at its roots, the branches wither and die. So it's all about fundamentals, isn't it? I mean, that's essentially what we're talking about. We're talking about fundamental ideas about learning, and that's, you know, that's what Dunlosky's really, you know, rooted in his thinking. But we had a discussion. I found it so interesting that one thing that's so refreshing about the Dunlosky paper that you bring alive in your book is that it's not like, you know, here's the theory, this is how you implement it. He's saying, here's a whole bunch of theories. Yeah. Let's test them out. And you know what? Some of them are more useful than others. And here's some techniques which are actually not very effective. And it's that kind of evaluative aspect, which is the strong contenders and the middle ones and the ones which are a bit, and even them, there's some value in them. So that was interesting, that need to kind of almost demonstrate that ideas have different weightings, and it's not just about good ones and bad ones. There's a kind of scale of impact. And so what was your sense of that? And for people who don't really know, what just tell people straight, you know, what are the strong contenders? What are the good? So like one of the conversations that like John Dunlosky and I had was about the intentional use of his language of the word like effectiveness. So he's placed these techniques on like a spectrum of effectiveness, is what I've described them in the book. So there's more effective and less effective. There was intentional avoidance of using good and bad, because there's so many things that can impact the effectiveness of a given strategy. So some of those less effective ones might actually be more effective. So something like summarization, for example, is A, the person is really skilled at summarizing, B, the content is particularly amenable to being summarized as well. So if I'm working in maths or physics, like, it's probably not as applicable. But if you're doing history, English, like one of the more written subjects, it's probably a good strategy to use, or more effective one. But overall, what they said was that spaced practice and retrieval or practice testing were the two most effective, more effective, I think is the language, the two more effective strategies out of all the 10 that they tested.
Were you surprised by any of them? Were you surprised by any of the ordering of them?
Yeah, like summarization 100%, because I think it's something that we the vast majority of people do all the time as a way to study. And I remember I did it when I was at uni. I've done it since when I'm studying. I do it all when I talk to other teachers. And I did a physics degree, so my degree is physics, but I still could summarize my lecture notes. It was like a technique I used. And so, and I remember reading Zoe and Mark Enser's book, and it's one of the techniques that like it is found to be quite effective in the paper that they discussed from Furiel and Mayer. And so that was the one where I was like, oh, I really need to be careful about this. And I think in that chapter I front loaded it saying like, don't shoot the messenger yet. Like this isn't a bad technique. You just need to be careful about it.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really like about the paper and about your book is it not only explains the technique, but it constantly reinforces the kind of horses for courses narrative. Like this might work in this situation, but be mindful it might not work there. And I think that's sometimes what's missing from some of here's the research is that, but just hang on, it doesn't work everywhere kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that one. And my favourite quote in the whole book is the one about you might have sort of given him a paintbrush when you're talking about the height.
Yeah. And it's funny because like every teacher will be able to picture a specific student and say, oh yeah, like that they should have just given him a paintbrush. Yeah.
That bit, if you haven't read it, is the bit where you're talking about the effectiveness or otherwise of highlighting parts of what you've read and what you've learned. I might as well have given him a paintbrush.
That is a common one, isn't it? I mean, that's one of those ones where, you know, and this is where he starts off the whole premise of the paper, is that like your average student will think they're studying and they've got their biology exam or whatever, but what do they actually do? And, you know, getting your highlighter out is a sort of soft thing to do because it, as he says, you know, essentially you're sort of highlighting stuff, therefore not highlighting the other stuff, which might be also important. And it doesn't mean you necessarily have thought about it or made any extra connections. You've just sort of almost eliminated. So it's actually quite a poor strategy unless you use the bits you've highlighted to then do some thinking with or whatever. And because your average student doesn't. No. They just have a multicolored thing. Yeah. And W.H. Smith would sell a whole lot fewer kind of, you know, yellow and pink fluorescent highlighters. Yeah.
And I think the thing with stuff like highlighting is it makes you feel like you've learned loads because there's a finished product, right? Like your book will be covered in highlights and you'll say like, wow, like I've done so much. Whereas like space practice or practice testing, you don't really have much to show for it. It doesn't give you that feel good feeling at the end of it. Where something like highlighting, rereading, like surprised, like, you remember everything you just highlighted. Like it makes you feel really good.
I was going to say as well, as a teacher, you'd kind of want them to remember pretty much everything you gave them anyway. So if you're giving them a really high quality piece of text or a diagram or something that you want them to learn, they need to highlight the whole thing because they need to remember the whole thing. So it's a nonsense strategy. Or unless you've given them, well, this one isn't very good, it's a bit shoddy, just pick out the bits that are to remember.
Yeah, exactly.
So as a teacher, you need to be so conscious of the fact that you know, the way that people are trying to learn things needs to have this sort of generative element to it, which is what the Furiel and Mayer book is doing. But you know, and summarizing, I feel like I remember talking to Alex Quigley about this in terms of reading, that they sort of summarizing and elaboration are sort of both, they almost need to go together. So if you summarized something into some notes, you then need to expand from the summary to check you still can hold on to all the rest of it. So it only really works as a kind of, it doesn't only really work. That's not very scientific of me, but it sort of works well if you're sort of saying, let's summarize it into some stuff I can kind of carry, but then can I expand from that back out and the kind of, so my schema for it is actually quite rich, but the process of summarizing has helped me emphasize the key parts. And that's what's so interesting, isn't it? Like these ideas aren't sort of neat. They have a kind of dynamic to them. So have you found this, like, in your work? I mean, you're a maths specialist. So how have you found that this type of thing translates into specific actions that teachers can use? Which of those things from the strengthening toolbox would you say, as a maths teacher, that this is what I found really helped me or my colleagues?
I remember the first time I read the paper, it was the first ever time I'd been exposed to the idea of interleaving, and I could just stuck, because the example given in the paper was about prisms and properties of prisms, like all math stuff, and I get really excited when we talk about maths. So I'll try and like be calm for now. But it really like just struck a chord with me, and so like I did the normal thing, which was like I read the paper, and then Monday morning I tried it in my classroom, and it just went terribly, just atrocious. Probably one of the worst lessons I've taught in my life. I'd mixed up random topics. I'd essentially confused kids more than anything. And so that's been a real passion for me, because it's such a hard idea to like understand and B, apply, and they're two very different things. But I think it's got such a massive application in a subject like maths, where there's so many concepts that are very, very similar on the surface, but require a completely different understanding. And that's where interleaving generally has its most potential. So that was the one where even now I have conversations with colleagues, even in my work at Ambition, about what does interleaving look like? Why does it work? How can we incorporate it into what we do? Should we incorporate it in what we do? Because is it actually fit for purpose? So that was the big one for me, for sure.
It's really interesting because the old national strategies for primary, the sequencing of their curriculum and their lesson sequencing was based very much on interleaving, but it wasn't called interleaving. And I still to this day don't know whether that was a deliberate decision by the strategists and they were doing that, or whether it was just chance. But that was the guidance that we were given as well when we were to teach and to sequence our maths teaching, was to include this idea of interleaving different topics or related topics through that. And it was only when I started to read about interleaving that I was like, oh, that's what we're doing. So it's really interesting. And so there is actually a lot of unofficial evidence that it was actually quite effective, but I don't think anybody ever measured it through that lens of interleaving, but everyone was doing it.
Yeah. I think that's one of the problems, because what I understand by interleaving, or like the word interleaving just has so many different connotations. Like I would understand it differently to someone else. And so, and the research, I think, means something really specific, but I don't think like academic research does a particularly good job of communicating what they mean when there's interleaving, and particularly what it looks like in the classroom. I think there's loads of experiments about it, but I think to figure out what this would look like in my classroom for my subject is something that's not really being looked at. And like, for example, where you say potentially it has, it's not been called interleaving, so we haven't been able to make those connections necessarily.
Exactly.
I suppose it's a bit like, this is what I do feel. It's like I only know some very specific studies like the Robert and Elizabeth Bjork's stuff, where in Desirable Difficulties, where one of the interleaving papers which I've read is about students remembering butterfly categories.
Yeah. And
you've got a whole pile of photographs of butterflies, and they have to sort of learn them. And so you've got sort of photographs of this very specific type of butterfly, and you study that. That's this type or species. Here's some other photographs of those, and then they do experiments where the students sort of blocked learnt one chunk and then another and then tested them later, versus what if we mix up all the butterflies and are constantly saying which types that was, and the space the interleaving people do better, but the effect of the interleaving is actually sort of much smaller just by spacing. So if you whichever type of study you do, if you do it again a bit later and space it, the effect of the whether you interleaved or blocked is actually quite small compared with the fact that you repeatedly did it and spaced it. So it's like all these things are like quite complicated.
Yeah.
And that's just remembering something very measurable, like how many did you get right on identifying the butterflies. But do you think it means this, like in maths? We're all maths geeks here, aren't we?
Yeah.
Like if you're doing prisms and like you've got the area of the shape at the end, and then a length, like, and that could be a triangle. So it could be an area of a triangle, but then another time you're doing area of a circle, you might do a whole unit on the area of a circle. But then when you're doing it as a volume, and then prism volume, and then you're interleaving with sort of the areas of all the shapes, and then the idea of volume. And it's a kind of like you can't sort of suddenly teach area of a circle all of a sudden. You've got to have taught area of a circle, and later you mix it in with the idea of volume and of a prism. Do you think that is that interleaving?
I don't know. Like, I think it's a good question. Like, I don't know, but like, that I think in and of itself, those are the sorts of conversations I would love for maths departments across the country to be having. Like, I think they're really, really valuable conversations, and understanding that if we do interleaving, and if it is interleaving, students are more likely to get things wrong, but like, that's okay, because so another thing that came out from the research was the types of errors that students made. So the performance when they were interleaving was worse than when they were blocking, the short-term performance. But what they found was that the students who interleave, when they made mistakes, they weren't content errors, they were like careless errors. They just forgot to make some calculation mistakes. And when they pushed them and said, like, explain this, they could explain what mistake they had made much better than the students whose practice was blocked. So the answer is I don't know. Like, I've taken a bit of a segue to try and hide that, but that is a really valuable conversation because those are the sorts of things that kids will mix up how to find the area of different prisms. Kids will mix up how to find the area of different polygons, different shapes in general. Even within it, kids will mix up area and perimeter all the time. So the question is, well, what do kids mix up? And that's where interleaving, like the potential interleaving lies, and separating out and being really explicit about, like, this is what you're mixing up. So let's go beyond the surface features of this thing to really understand what's the underlying feature. So what makes this a cylinder and not a triangular prism? What makes this an area question and not a volume question, or an area question and not a perimeter question? That's what we want to draw students' attention to.
It's like constantly looping back and forward between the things you've done before. It's like petals of a flower, I guess.
Yeah.
Coming back and linking it all together.
Yeah,
you can have that on meeting. I have a question, right, Tom? I have a question. Why is it always butterflies? Austin's butterfly, the Bjork's butterflies. Why butterflies? That's what I want to know.
Because they're beautiful things with symmetry and to different species. I don't know. We're drawn to them. The butterfly effect. But one of the things I love is all these ideas connect. So in our previous episode of Mind the Gap, very early on, we talked to we spoke to Mark McCourt about maths, and he has some really amazing ideas. Like one of his ideas is this idea of sort of looking back at what you've learned with fresh eyes. So, for example, when you learn that 1 plus x, 1 over x plus 1 over y can be solved because you can use algebra, that then makes sense of all the times you've just been doing a half plus a third. And because you see that a half plus a third as a specific example of 1 over x plus 1 over y. And so you're reevaluating your understanding of the pattern that you made with your common denominator through the sort of generalized thing. And I love this idea of sort of maturation in maths. Over time, you get more and more sophisticated in your understanding because you're constantly looking back over everything you've learned so far and linking it up. And for me, that's one of the most beautiful things about maths. So like for example, how a sine curve is drawn out, the wheel around.
Yeah,
it creates a circle. It's like a circle spinning, and like the properties of sine and cosine compared with just circles. It's like, whoa, like when you make that link, it's like, how cool is that? It's just really, that's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, you're tempting me now to like go off on a proper maths tangent. But for all those reasons, like, my friends and I would laugh when we were at university that we're doing maths modules in our physics, and we couldn't remember the last time we've written numbers. Like, I think maths is one of those, like, is a subject where you're just constantly getting more and more abstract. And when you finally understand these like really complex abstract concepts, and you see like all the concrete ones that have been building, you're like, oh my gosh, like, you know, the whole of all of my life now makes sense. Yeah, it's all a revelation. So yeah, and that's ultimately what we want to achieve, isn't it? Like this complex, deep, abstract understanding, because that's what's applicable to all of these concrete contexts that we've built students up from.
It says in the national curriculum, doesn't it, though, to appreciate the inherent beauty of mathematics. It says in the purpose of maths. And you can't appreciate the inherent beauty of mathematics if you've not secured that procedural fluency first, so that you can actually go, whoa, now let me have a look at it. But I'm still stuck on the flower, because you said about they make more mistakes with interleaving. I'm now on the flower going, he learns it not. He learns it.
That's very good.
I might have to steal that energy from you, Anna, I'll be honest.
You heard it here.
I have this sort of bank of like lessons that my children learnt at school, the things that stick out to me that they brought home that we talked about, you know. And one of them was my son's first maths lesson in secondary school, where the teacher blew his mind by talking about the number 1, and they talked about whether 1 was like, if you count on your fingers 1, 2, 3, is that the same one as when you're sort of saying £1 is 1 penny more than 99p, or 3 divided by 3 is 1 each. Is that the same one? And all of that, like, is 1 a size, a scale? Can you touch it? Is it a physical entity? It's like whoa! Like, you never thought of it that way.
It says, is a number a noun or is it an adjective? And if it's a noun, what is it?
This is where you're testing my English subject knowledge.
No, so for example, is a noun, is a number a thing, like it's 3, or is it an adjective where it's only used to describe something else, like 3 apples or 3 bananas? But if it is a noun, if it's 3, what is the thing? Is 3 because it's 1 less than 4, or is 3 because it's double 1.5? So what makes 3 a noun? And if we're teaching maths, we should teach number as a noun, not number as an adjective, because we should know the properties of that number and how it relates to everything else, not just use it as a descriptor for something else, which I thought was a really interesting take on things.
We're losing our non-maths listeners at this point.
I think I might be gaining them somewhat. I don't think we've ever had it, but yeah, maths explained to us in a way like that. Like, yeah, I'm going to have a sleepless night tonight.
I'm going to ask you something else now, Steve. Now, one of the things that I know about you is that you work full time now for the Ambition Institute, and when you're engaging with Twitter and you go to Research Ed and you're just engaged in the world of education, Ambition Institute, you hear about it all the time, and I feel like, yeah, what, another person works for Ambition Institute, or that's also by Ambition Institute, and I just think, well, are you guys taking over the universe or something? Like, what is it? For people who don't know what Ambition Institute is, what is it? Tell people.
Yeah, so Ambition Institute is a national charity. We work with schools and teachers to help teachers to keep getting better. That's our mission statement, is to help teachers to keep getting better. So we run loads of different courses. We work on the MPQs, the new suite of MPQs that have come out. We work on the early career framework. And we also offer some more niche programs. So we offer Masters in Expert Teaching. That's the one I was in the pilot cohort for that back in 2018, and now coach on it as part of my work with Ambition. And we offer programs for schools like Transforming Teaching as well, which is a whole school-wide program. So we have loads of different ways in which we're trying to improve the educational outcomes for students that our teachers work with. So
what does that involve for you then? So what do you do every day?
What do I do every day? Really good question. So like 80% of my time is working on our master's program. So Our masters is very different to sort of traditional university-based masters. Our teachers will turn up at the start of the module, spend 2 days delving into theory around a particular problem of teaching and learning that we face. So how do we get students to remember stuff? How do we get students to take in the information we're giving them? How can we accurately tell what students do and don't know? We frame it like that. And then they spend the next terms, the 2 half terms, rigorously going into the research and testing stuff in their classrooms around. So my interleaving, for example, that was the one I did when I started the masters. It made for interesting reading because I got it all wrong, which is interesting, but part of the process. So that's the majority of my work. We also are running an early career framework maths pilot at the moment, and so I do some design and delivery work on that. So specifically for maths, ECTs and mentors. And so early days in that at the moment, but our goal is to be able to roll out more subject specific stuff to support the teachers and students that they work with.
Are the subject specific ones just secondary? Is it just Key Stage 3 onwards?
So at the moment, this is like the first one that we're trying. The maths pilot is the very first to figure out what sort of impact that we might have. Our goal is potentially not to take over the universe, but our goal is to try and roll out with a view to rolling out more subject and phase specific stuff, depending on how this first one goes. We think we're in a good place with it. We think we've got a really good base of knowledge and people that we're working with to be able to support or better support the trainers and mentors working in a maths context. So we'll road test it, review it, and then our goal is to ultimately be able to offer a bit more specialised support in the long term.
Well, your book is an absolute cracker for ECTs because it explains so much of that of the a couple of the strands in the ECF about the model of memory and everything. It's so succinct, and you can tell from reading it that you work with early career teachers because it's written in such an accessible way for people who may be interacting it for the first time or relatively early on in their reading of it. You can really see that you work in teacher training because it reads beautifully.
Emma, you're a kind of ECT, expert. I mean, I know you can recite it in your sleep because it's, you're constantly it's poetry.
Practice testing got into that,
my very well thumped coffee off the early career framework.
So, do you think this is a good move then to weave subject specialism into what is a generic framework? Do you think that's a good move?
I genuinely would welcome it because I think as ambitious as the early career framework was in trying to get everybody to have access to the bare bones, basically, I think that where it was a bit wide of the mark was recognising that people's individual subjects and phases are specialist in themselves, and so you do need to supplement or top up or come from a slightly different angle to make that the most impactful it can be. I mean, it's very difficult as a trainer in a room full of people when you're doing the ECF, when you've got early years colleagues and post 16. It's really hard. So it does need a specialist angle on it. Maybe not all of it, but definitely a supplement to it or a different look at it. Yes, of course, definitely.
Is that what you're finding, Singh? Is it like making more sense to you doing it in that way?
Our goal is to try and address some of the I think the difficulty has been we've got some broad principles that we want ECTs to be able to know and take into their teaching. How can we support them in that process? How can we support them in seeing this knowledge and this broad understanding of some of the principles behind effective teaching and apply it and help them to apply it in their very specific context. And so we're hoping that this pilot is like the first step on the way to trying to bridge that gap.
I think it's adding another level of complexity. If the person explaining it is giving you an example that's not in your subject and not in your phase, and you are novice, and then trying to make that leap and that link from this is what it looks like in this context to this is what it's look like in mine when you're novice in it. So I think that having that start of being taught by or having included expert in your phase or your subject is hugely helpful for the ECT as well, because they're not having to make that leap in how might this look. They've actually got a concrete example to work from.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's obviously both, isn't it? So I observe lots of teachers, and even I think it goes beyond early career teachers, where half the time when you're discussing something with a teacher, you're saying it's a curriculum thing. It's the specific questions or the nature of the content of the material, and it's very specific to that. But other times it's nothing. It's something you could be talking to any teachers about, behaviour management or questioning. Also, so we always have that interface for all of us. It's just that when you're an early career teacher, the learning curve is huge on both fronts, and so you have to kind of like pick it out, don't you?
Absolutely. And I liken it to the fact that when we demonstrate in primary, one of the things we tell ECTs never to do is don't demonstrate with one thing or one piece of equipment and then expect the children to go away and solve the problem with a different bit. So don't demonstrate with a number line and then expect them to go and use cubes or vice versa. But ironically, that's what the ECF was doing in some cases. We'll give you the example in secondary science, but your primary now go work it out in your context. So it was like flying in the face. But anyway, I digress. That's another conversation for another day.
There's something else I want to ask you about, Singh. It's like, because I've got in my hands, this is one of my collection. I've got a nerdy collection of research ed brochures. I'm going to make a bold claim, which is I think I've been to more research eds than anyone. So,
I would have on it.
I think the last one was the 40th one I've been to. So if someone else has been to more than 40, come on, let's hear it. And you were at the last one, the national conference at Parliament Hill in London, and your session, I was really, really fascinated by this. You're talking about learning versus performance. I was thinking, why aren't you doing Dunlosky? So what was that? That's such an interesting area. What was the thrust of what you were saying to people about the learning versus performance?
So one of the things that I think I took away from Dunlosky's paper and from the process of writing the book is why do students choose and use poor study strategies, and sometimes why do teachers not see that difference as well? Like, what makes something effective study strategy versus something not effective? Now, we spoke earlier about how highlighting makes kids feel really good. They feel like they've done loads. They have a concrete product of their efforts. They can magically recall everything. But the research suggests that in the long run, that initial really high performance is very misleading. And actually something that's much harder initially, something like practice testing, will lead to better long-term benefits. And so I wanted to sort of go into the underpinnings of Dunlosky's work and the research from the book as well, and frame it around two questions. Firstly, what does this mean for us as teachers? What does it mean if a student can get a question right at the end of our lesson, but can't get it right the next week when we quiz them on it? Or if they're struggling with this potentially similar concepts, like the idea of area and perimeter, if they're struggling to recognize when I'm using the area equation, when I'm using the perimeter equation, but like the next time round, they can articulate it quite well. What are the reasons for this? And why do students choose and use poor study strategies? So that was a sort of framing for that session. So I chose to go down this road of learning versus performance. It was like Dunlosky based, but I wanted to take sort of a deep dive into some of the underpinnings of his research.
Wow, it's so interesting. The example of that which plagues me, I feel like I'm scarred by it, is T squared, like teaching sort of like lower attaining students in maths in year 10, who when you're doing practice and you think, oh, we're getting this. They get squares, cubes, indices, generally. Great, well done. 7 squared is 49, rocking it. And then test, 7 squared is 14. Why?
Yeah.
What's happened to you?
Yeah. And this is the thing, like, it happens all the time, right? It's one of those things where when someone else says it, you're like, oh my God, yes. When you said, oh, when you get to a test, I immediately knew the answer was going to be 14. I immediately knew that's where you were going, right? Because it's just so common. It happens all the time. And so that was one of the things, was like, this happens to all teachers all the time. It's such a common experience. Why? Why does it keep happening? So that was where that sort of talk came from.
Yes.
Have you read Mark McCourt's chapter on near-far transfer?
I haven't had a chance to yet.
Oh,
no.
That's beautiful. That links perfectly with what you're saying. It's a chapter I go back to all the time about performance versus learning and near-far transfer. That's your professional reading for the next.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It's my most well done chapter. But every time I hear him talk about near-far transfer, all I can hear is Celine Dion saying near-far wherever you are. So when I'm explaining it now, that's
what's going through your head.
Yeah,
sometimes I'm so troubled by the way your mind works. It's
I know, but you try living in it, Tom. Just try living in it.
But yeah, I mean, it's funny. But I see this. I love all these connections. So we get the privilege of talking to lots of different people. I mean, and the connections, you can hear them. So one of Mark's things is recency and cue. And for me, that's like a genius way of dealing with learning versus performance. So recency, you have to be conscious that because I've just shown you, you can use your working memory, but I need to sort of break away from recency and start saying, like, can you still do it? And even like 10 minutes, like, let's show you now, like, come back to something 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And that little hump of getting over that really short-term thing. And then obviously the next lesson, the further away you get from it recently having learned something, the more difficult it is. And the other one is cue. So, and to me, that was a lovely idea that, and you basically have this in your book on the section on interleaving, where you've got a whole bunch of fractions, and sometimes they're multiply, sometimes they're add, sometimes they're subtraction, and they're not all saying these are multiply questions, so they're not cued. And that is, so in a way, the cue and the interleaving are they're connected ideas, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if kids just had 10 addition questions, 10 subtraction, multiplication, division, what they would do is think fairly hard for the first 2, and then just realise the next 8 were exactly the same principle. And so they're not really thinking about, well, what makes this an addition question and what makes that a subtraction question. They're just doing some number crunching. Whereas if you mix them all up randomly, each time they're having to think really hard about what question they are, and then link whatever cue they've got from the question to the appropriate learning from their memory, and then execute it. So the cue is there, but they have to really understand, what is this cue for? Which memory do I choose? And so each time they choose that memory, they're strengthening the link between that cue and that memory.
The other one we do in primary is you'll give them a set of worded problems. The classic one was they didn't read the words at all, they just looked for the 2 numbers and added them together or subtracted from whatever it was. So what we bypass that by is, okay, here's 12 questions, only solve the ones that are addition questions, or only solve the ones that are addition questions that involve bridging, or addition questions that involve partitioning. So they're having to constantly refer back to everything they know, and then only do the ones which match whatever strategy that we're looking at. So it's possible to do it with very, very young children as well, to draw on all of those other little bits that they're learning at the same time. Which is fascinating. I love
this sort of conversations. I love, especially primary. I'm really lucky in my World Ambition. It's the first time I've really been exposed to primary colleagues. And the world of primary maths, I just find fascinating. To have that conversation, of what you just shared, Emma. It's amazing the fact we're doing this with really young children, stretching them this way. Yeah, I absolutely love these conversations.
Singh, you and I need to go for a drink.
Yeah, I think so.
I like that thing you just said, being exposed to primary colleagues. Like, yeah, it's like their radiation or something. It's like,
that definitely wasn't meant that way. Yeah,
they're having an impact. They're radiating
we do have a very specific energy. Let's put it very specific energy.
That is a beautiful way. You know what? I actually think, because we're nudging up at the time here, I'm going to wrap up this episode on the idea of primary colleagues radiating beautiful energy through to Singh and his colleagues at Ambition. Well, look, honestly, it's so lovely to talk to you. You're such a great enthusiast. I love this whole thing of, like, you know, you started off by talking about how you were just like a regular teacher from Gravesend or whatever. But yeah, you're not. There's no regular about that. And also, it's just brilliant the way you've sort of coming in to share all these ideas and all these different ways you're doing it. It's brilliant. So thank you so much. It's a real inspiration. Inspired Learn. There you go. That's why it's you have the right Twitter. So thanks very much, Singh. Thanks for being on our show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Oh, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone listening. We've been having a great run recently, and we're slightly blown away by the fact that we're sort of getting like nearly 2,000 listens per episode. We're told, which is just crazy. So thank you so much for watching the YouTube and listening on the platforms for your podcast. Thanks for listening to Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe, with me, Tom Sherrington, and Emma. Thank you very much.